Hello everyone. Welcome to UPSC Civil Service Exam Notes. We are providing free competitive notes. Be active, deep focus. Let's start. Class 11 NCERT Economics Chapter 3, Liberalization, Privatization and Globalization, an Appraisal. Economic Crisis in 1991 and Indian Economy Reforms Crisis. In India is figured out because of the inefficient management in the Indian economy in 1980s. The revenue generated by the government were not adequate to meet the growing expenses, so the government resorted to borrowing to pay for its debts and was caught in a debt trap. Cause of economic crisis. 1. The continued spending on development programs of the government did not generate additional revenue. 2. Government was not able to generate sufficient funds from internal sources such as taxation. 3. Expenditure on areas like social sector and defense do not provide immediate returns. So there was a need to utilize the rest of the revenue in a highly effective manner. 4. The income from public sector undertaking was also not very high to meet the growing expenditure. 5. Foreign exchange borrowed from other countries and international financial institutions was spent on meeting consumption needs to make repayment on other loans. Need for economic reforms. The economic policy followed by the government up to 1990 failed in many aspects and landed the country in an unprecedented economic crisis. The situation was so alarming that Indians' foreign reserves were barely enough to pay for 2 weeks of imports. New loans were not available and NRIs were withdrawing large amounts. There was an erosion of confidence of international investors in the Indian economy. The following points highlight the need for economic reforms in the country. Increasing fiscal deficit, adverse balance of payments, Gulf crisis, rise in prices, high rate of deficit financing, emergence of new economic policy (NEP). Finally, India approached International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, popularly known as World Bank and IMF, and received $7 million as a loan to manage the crisis. International agencies expected India to liberalize and open up economy by removing restrictions between India and foreign countries. India agreed to the conditions of World Bank and IMF and had announced new economic policy, which consists of wide range of economic forms. Liberalization. It was introduced to put an end to these restrictions and open various sectors of the economy. It is generally defined as looking of government regulations in a country to follow for private sector companies to operate business transactions with favor restrictions in relations to development countries. These reforms to opening of economic borders for multinational and foreign investment. Objectives of liberalization. 1. To increase competition among domestic industries. 2. To increase foreign capital formation and technology. 3. To decrease the debt burden of the country. 4. To encourage export and imports of goods and service. Economic reforms under liberalization. 1. Deregulation of industrial sector. In India the following steps were taken to deregulate the industrial sector. 1. Abolition of industrial licensing. Government abolished the licensing requirement of all small industries, except for the 5 industries: liquor, cigarettes, defense equipment, industrial explosive, dangerous chemicals and pharmaceuticals. 2. Contraction of public sector. The number of industries reserved for the public sector was reduced from 17 to 8. Presently only 3 industries are reserved for public sector: railways, atomic energy, defense. 3. Dereservation of production areas. The production which were earlier resources for small-scale industries were to reserves. 4. Expansion of production capacity. The producers were allowed to expand their production capacity according to market demand. The need for licensing was abolished. 5. Freedom to import capital goods. The business and production units were given freedom to import capital goods to upgrade their technology. 2. Financial sector reforms. It includes financial institutions such as commercial banks, investment banks, stock exchange operations, foreign exchange market. 3. Tax reforms. Tax reforms are concerned with the reforms in the government taxation and public expenditure policies, which are collectively known as its fiscal policy. Since 1991, there has been a continuous reduction in the taxes on individual incomes, as it was felt that high rates of income tax were an important reasons for tax evasion. 4. Foreign exchange reforms. It includes reforms relating to foreign exchange and foreign trade. 5. Trade and investment policy reforms. Liberalization of trade and investment regime was initiated to increase international competitiveness of industrial production, and also foreign investments and technology into the economy. Privatization. It implies shedding of the ownership or management of a government-owned enterprises. Government companies are converted into private companies. Privatization of the public sector enterprises by selling off part of the equity of PSE to the public is known as disinvestment. Globalization. It means integration of the economy of the country with the world economy. It encourages foreign trade and private and institutional foreign investment. Globalization is a complex phenomenon as it is an outcome of the set of various policies that are aimed transforming the world towards greater interdependence and integration. Outstanding. This is one of the important outcomes of globalization process. In outsourcing, a company hires regular service from external sources, mostly from other countries, which was previously provided internally or from within the country, like legal advice, computer service, advertisement security, each provided by respective departments of the company. World Trade Organization (WTO), founded in 1995. As the successor organization to GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. GATT was established in 1948 with 23 countries as the Global Trade Organization, to administer all multilateral trade agreements by providing equal opportunity to all countries in the international market for trading purposes. WTO is expected to establish rule-based trading regime, in which nations cannot place arbitrary restrictions on trade. Economic growth during reforms. Growth of an economy is measured by GDP. The growth of GDP increased from 5.6% during 1980 to 1991, to 8.2% during 2007 to 2012. Main highlights of economic growth during reforms are given below. 1. During the reform period, the growth of agriculture was declined, while the industrial sector reported fluctuation. The growth of the service sector gone up. This indicates that the growth is mainly driven by the growth in service sector. 2. The opening up of the economy has led to the FDI and FII, foreign institutional investment, has increased from about $100 million in 1990 to 1991 to $400 billion in 2010-11. 3. There has been increased in foreign exchange reserves from about $6 billion in 1990 to 1991. To $300 billion in 2011 to 2012. In 2011, India was the 7th largest foreign exchange holder in the world. 4. India is seen as a successful exporter of auto parts, engineering goods, IT software and textiles in the reform period. Rising prices also have been kept under control. Failures of economic reforms. 1. Neglect of agriculture. There has been deterioration in agricultural growth rate. This deterioration is the root cause of the problem of rural distress that reached crisis in some parts of the country. Economic reforms have not been able to benefit the agriculture sector because a. Public investment in agriculture sector, especially in infrastructure, which includes irrigation, power, roads and market linkages and research and extension, has been reduced in the reform period. b. The removal of fertilizer subsidy has led to increase in the cost of products. Removal of MSP and lifting of quantitative restrictions have increases the threat of international competition to the Indian farmers. c. Export-oriented policy strategies in agriculture has been a shift from production for the domestic market towards production for the export market, focusing on cash crop and lies of production of food grains. 2. Uneven growth in industrial sector. Industrial sector registered uneven growth during this period. This is because of decreasing in demand of industrial products due to various reasons. a. Cheaper imports have decreased the demand of domestic industrial goods. b. There was inadequate investment in infrastructure facilities such as power supply. c. An developing country like India still does not have the access to developed countries' markets because of high non-tariff business. 3 other failures. In addition to the above-mentioned failures, the other drawbacks of LPG policy were: a. It led to unbanned concentration of growth process. b. It encouraged economic colonialism. c. It resulted in the spread of consumerism. d. It led to culture erosion. That's it. We are completed Chapter 3. We are working for you to give free education. Stay with us. Learn more easily and free. Subscribe and like. UPSC CSE Notes. Work for people and serve the country. Jai Hind.